Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com. And of course, follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this is made possible by our sponsors, OWC. For more information on how they can assist you in your filmmaking needs, go to owcdigital.com. This week, I'm joined by composer Jeff Russo, whose work includes Star Trek Picard, The Umbrella Academy, Clarice, and of course, the Fargo TV series. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Hey, how are you?
I guess my first question is, when I think about Fargo and I think about Star Trek Picard, you're building on a foundation of something that's already there. So, like in particularly with Star Trek Picard, it's a pretty famous score from the original series. So, how do you go about working on a series like that and making sure that you're leaving your stamp on it, but still respecting the original?
Well, so we're not a sequel,
Mm-hmm.
and we're not really anything like if you're referring to the Next Generation.
Mm-hmm.
We have a character that we're based around. So the scores didn't need to be the same. They didn't
Mm-hmm.
need to be. As a matter of fact, they needed to be quite different. They needed to be significantly different because really the storytelling device is completely different than the Next Generation was. I do tend to quote the original. Well, so the Next Generation main theme, which comes from the original motion picture,
Mm-hmm.
I quote that that melody, on a number of occasions, and I do try to, pay homage to the music that has come prior to this, but it's definitely something very different. So there isn't any reason that I needed to like make sure that I was the same
Mm-hmm.
as the Next Generation. If anything, I needed to be different.
So when you get like a script for a TV show or a feature, um, what do you do with this, like the script? How do you figure out what you want the sound to be like? Like, what are the discussions with the directors and your team?
Uh, you know, uh, the main question is, what do we want to feel?
Mm.
That's really the question is, how do I effectively represent the emotional context of the narrative, which is
Mm.
just a sort of fancy way of saying, like, how do you want the audience to feel?
Interesting. So, for because you've done a lot of sci-fi shows, is that something you're a particular genre you're a fan of, or is
Uh,
that some?
I've always been a fan of sci-fi. I've always been a fan of those types of that type of
Mhm.
storytelling. Um, but I think that I don't know if that has anything to do with the fact that I sort of have gravitated towards those types of stories, and the people who tell those stories have gravitated towards me as a collaborator, musical collaborator for them.
Mhm.
Because I didn't start doing those. It sort of didn't really become um, something that I was doing a lot of until after I had begun work on Discovery, on Star Trek Discovery.
Hmm. So, what would you say are some of the challenges that a lot of young composers aren't aware of that you've sort of learned and overcome in your career?
I mean, challenges to overcome. I don't really know how to answer that question effectively because there are many different challenges for many different types of people,
Mm.
and everybody has their own challenges that they need to overcome. But I think that the one thing that I'm sure of that not enough young composers understand is that writing music is a small part of the job of being an effective media composer. I think that one of the more important facets of the job is the ability to communicate with your collaborators, and the ability to collaborate, and the ability to be open, and the ability to be able to effectively communicate intent and effectively understand intent and be able to translate that intent into music. Those are way more important tools than the ability to write notes on a page and or play chord progressions, or the ability, like you don't get to play the game unless you can write music. And so the understanding when you get to a certain level is, okay, you know how to write music. Now, can you do all this other stuff? And that really does sort of define the difference between someone who will have success. And I don't necessarily mean financial success or like big movie success. I just mean like the ability to move forward and do the work is really defined by their ability to communicate.
Now, you worked with Ron Moore on For All Mankind. What was that working relationship like?
Actually, we spoke a good deal of an amount in the beginning of the first season. And to be honest, he sort of takes a back seat on that show. From the music standpoint, I think that he's involved in creating a temp. He's involved in sort of directional things for the producers, but I haven't really had much in the way of direct contact with him regarding the score since the first season.
So because one of the things in the first season and the second season is there's huge jumps in time. So do you find that you had to make, like, for each of the eras, did you make different like sort of sonic experiences? Or
this is a question that I get asked a lot with different shows that I work on or different movies that I've worked on, where there may be time jumps because in season 1 we're in this time period, in season 2 we're in this time period. That doesn't really affect the score. When we are doesn't really affect the score unless somebody says, you know what, we've jumped back in time, so we want the score to sound like 1850. That really doesn't happen much. It can happen, but certainly in a situation where we are trying to tell a story, like with For All Mankind, the intent of the music is to really define the emotional context of the characters. So that doesn't change with time. That is what it is. So we sort of come up with a palette of sounds for a season, which doesn't really have to do with when we are, but really more what we are doing and what we're feeling. So there was a slight change between season 1 and season 2, as there will be a slight change between season 2 and season 3. It's usually additive and not subtractive. It's usually like, oh, what if we were to add this sound, or what if we were to add this sound to sort of give a little nod to this or a little nod to that. But certainly we don't really think about, like, in that first season we were in the 60s, and then in the second season we sort of moved into the 70s and 80s. We didn't try to make an 80s sounding score for season 2.
So no synthesizers, what you're saying.
I mean, again, not deliberately, not deliberately. Yes, right. No Phil Collins snare drums. Yeah. Not deliberately. There wasn't a deliberate, like, let's make us an 80s sounding score. Let's make a score for the show, and this is what we're feeling, and this is where we are. And do we want to nod our cap, like tip our hat to some of these ideas? Well, sure, we do. But it's not as defined as what you're suggesting.
So is there a show or a movie that you worked on that was particularly challenging, but you were really proud of the outcome?
I mean, everything I work on has its challenges. So is there one specific, getting first hired to do the new Star Trek after not having been on the air for 15 years, was it complicated? I mean, the entire being able to produce a score of that magnitude is complex, but it was more terrifying than it was complex. It was more like, oh, there's a lot to live up to. Oh, there's all these wonderfully fantastic composers that have come before me. How do I live up to that? How do I stand with them? And are people going to hate it? Are people going there's all kinds of emotional roller coaster rides that you go on when doing something like that. So I would say that's the most challenging thing, like the sort of emotional roller coaster you go on as a composer who, suffers greatly from imposter syndrome, which most of us do. And I would say that's the most challenging thing, sort of getting over fear. In life in general is all about getting over fear. So
do you have a particular way of doing that, getting over the fear and when you're studying a show?
No, there's no one way that I do it. You just sort of sit down and do the work and hope that the work speaks for itself, and you sort of beat yourself up and then you feel better and drink coffee and go for a walk and come back. There's no one thing that I do in order to try to get over some of those moments of terror. But that you'll wake up the next day and sort of do it again,
Yeah. So you said that like every project has its challenges. So for the Umbrella Academy, which has been so popular, what were some of the challenges that you faced?
What were some of the challenges? What I honestly don't know how to answer that question. Every day is another challenge. What are some of the challenges? Like, how do we deal with writing as much music as we need to do in that time, in that amount of time? How do we get all of these musicians together and record the orchestra for, there's all kinds of technical challenges. Was it musically challenging? I mean, coming up with thematic material for very eclectic characters can be challenging to sit and figure out how to get tonality correct without being too on the nose and without being too generic. There isn't like a specific challenge that I would go, oh yeah, that one thing. I mean, because it's never just one thing. With any given project, it's 1,000 things.
Yeah.
And the 1,000 things put together is the challenge. Because, all the challenges in and of itself, like on their own, are not that bad, not that, hard to deal with. But when you put them all together, that's when the problems happen. It's like when you're in an airplane and there's a plane crash. Usually the plane crash happens because not one problem happens, but a cascade of 100 problems happen. And that's what you're trying to always sort of get away from. It's like, as the problems cascade, that's usually the biggest challenge. So it's like, sure, there's schedule, there's amount of music, there's how do you schedule the recording sessions in enough time to get the mix done for the, to get to the dub mix. And, there's a million challenges. And for me, having a really solid, backroom team to help me with that is really important. Like, I wouldn't be able to get all of that done and produced if I didn't have, engineers and editors and mixers and assistants and orchestrators and copyists and all these people that have to come together in order to make a score happen.
Now, who do you like? Where do you turn to for your influences? Like, what are the musicians that you really sort of listen to for inspiration?
I don't listen for inspiration. I listen for enjoyment. I enjoy listening to classical music. So would I say that classical music inspires me? Sure. But it's like, I don't specifically go to music to get inspired to do a specific thing. I'd rather have it be quiet. So I do listen to music to enjoy music. So, in terms of work, I listen to music all day. So I don't tend to listen to music in order to help work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
No, it does. Now I have one last question I ask everyone I interview. What would you say like we've been stuck in this pandemic for going on 2 years now. During that time, a lot of people have sort of turned to streaming services for entertainment. Is there a show or a movie you discovered over the last year that you think people should check out?
Well, The Queen's Gambit was fantastic.
Yeah.
And that was really the one show that I found, that and Ted Lasso.
Yeah.
You know, these are shows that everybody talks about. And, you know, I mean, I watched Queen's Gambit before anybody was talking about it. That's simply because I was like, oh, what's Queen's Gambit? And I watched it, and I watched it all in, I think, 2 days. You know, Ted Lasso. Yeah. I mean, that was something really, really great for me and my family to share.
Well, thank you so much for letting us interview.
Oh, no worries.
That's it for this week. Make sure to check out filmmakeru.com for all our latest courses, and follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u, and on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe button and check that notification bell for all our weekly videos. I want to thank our guests again, Jeff, for joining us. And of course, our sponsors, OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking needs. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.